All right. Okay, welcome everybody to ASAC's social skills training for parents. So if you're just joining in now, this is a 6-week series where we learn how to support the social and emotional needs of your child. And so this is week 2, where we talk about providing feedback with labeled praises and the feedback sandwich. So just a few housekeeping items. So for now, we'll be muting you to avoid any background noise, but you'll have the chat at the bottom of the screen. So you can feel free to chat in the box and then with any questions that you might have, and Dr. Palladay will be monitoring that chat and answering any questions in the meantime. We'll also have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And then for those of you that aren't as familiar with Zoom, there is on the top right, you can choose your viewing layout. So later on, if you feel comfortable, you can turn on your camera and switch to the gallery view when we open up for discussion, and that way you can see everyone that's on the call. So with that, we're going to get started with introductions. So my name is Sandy Trent. I'm a pediatric resident with the ASAC clinic, as well as the Mailman Center on the medical campus, primarily working or involved in psychoeducational and diagnostic evaluations, as well as behavioral interventions for children with autism spectrum disorder.
And my name is Ellen Schmidt, and I'm also a pediatric psychology resident at the Mailman Center for Child Development and also with ASAC. I do a number of different types of assessment and intervention clinics with young children, both children with autism and other social communication difficulties, and also children with different types of behavior difficulties.
Hi, I'm Dr. Parladay. I am a licensed psychologist and clinical supervisor at the Autism Spectrum Assessment Clinic, ASAC, and also the CART Center. I've been a psychologist there for 8 years now. We have been running through our clinic, through ASAC, a social skills group intervention for children between the ages of 9 and 12 and their parents. For quite a few years now. So pre-COVID times, we offer that group 3 times a year. While our in-person services have been paused now because of the pandemic, we are very thrilled to be able to offer some of that content here through this webinar series. So we'll be excited to share some of that information with you today.
As I mentioned, it is a 6-week series, so we have here the topics for each week, and you can tune into any or all of the sessions in the series. And so we'll provide in the chat box if you need more information on how to access those other sessions as well. Generally, the structure of each session is really a 30-minute presentation with about a 15-minute Q&A session. Today we'll also have a few minutes to practice the skills that we learned today. And yeah, again, you can use the chat box at any time if you have questions during the presentation. With just a note on confidentiality, we are recording the presentation portion, but we'll turn off the recording during the discussion portion. So everything that we will discuss will be confidential. And then just a plug on some of the other UM-CARD activities that are available. These are all virtual resources. In particular, the one in the middle, the mental health supports for parents, is also a 6-week parent group that is running concurrently. So we can also provide information in the chat box about that as well. Okay, so today we'll be learning about how to provide effective feedback for your child to improve his or her social skills. So we're going to talk about labeled praises and other pride skills, the feedback sandwich, and what we call child-directed interaction time. And then again, at the end, we'll have some time to practice all these skills, and we'll do a Q&A as well. So providing feedback to improve social skills. So when we think of improving social skills, what we're really thinking of is changing behavior. So in psychology, we think of in terms of what we call the ABCs of behavior change. So for each behavior, we have the antecedent, what occurs right before the behavior itself, and then the consequence, what occurs right after the behavior. And we know that changing the antecedent or the consequence will create a change in behavior. And so today we'll be focusing on the C, or the consequence. So we intuitively know that the more positive feedback that we get after behavior, the more likely it is for it to occur again. In contrast, the less attention we give to a behavior, the less likely it is for the behavior to occur again. So we want to keep this in mind as we think about the best way to provide feedback to improve social skills. So one of the best ways to provide feedback is labeled praises. So there are two types of praises. There's labeled praises and unlabeled praises. So unlabeled praises are non-specific. So things like good or nice job. These aren't bad, but there are even better types of praises called labeled praises. And so these ones are specific. You're being very, very careful with that pen, or thank you for listening. So these are praises that praise a specific behavior. The reason why these are really good are that it helps your child know exactly what they did right. So it increases the chance that that behavior will happen again. In general, it also increases positive behavior, self-esteem. When we think of improving the social skills, or when we think of kind of decreasing the problematic social behavior, for every one of those problematic behaviors, there is a positive alternative behavior. So, the more that we provide labeled praise for those positive alternative behaviors, the more those behaviors increase, and then the more those problematic behaviors will decrease. We can also think of giving less attention or ignoring those negative behaviors as ways of decreasing those problematic social behaviors as well. So here's an example of labeled praise of a positive alternative. So let's say that your child is frequently interrupting others in conversation. So a positive alternative behavior to that would be waiting his or her turn to talk. So then every time you catch him or her waiting their turn, you can then give them that labeled praise of that alternative behavior. So thank you for waiting for me to finish before you spoke. So instead of waiting for the problematic behavior to occur to provide feedback, you're instead providing feedback throughout the day on all the socially appropriate behaviors that they're doing. So along with labeled praises, there are other skills that you can use to give your child positive attention. So we use the acronym PRIDE skills to help us remember. So the P, we just learned about the praise. The next is reflect. So reflecting, your child is basically just repeating or paraphrasing what they say. So if your child says, I drew a tree, you can say, yes, you made a tree. In addition, you can imitate your child, so basically copying what they're doing, using their toys or doing activities. So if they're, for instance, drawing circles or drawing a house on a piece of paper, you can also draw a circle or house on the paper. So the D stands for describe. So basically just saying what your child is doing when they're doing it. So sort of like a sports commentator doing like a play-by-play of what your child is doing. So like you put the girl inside the fire truck, or you're making a tower. And then the E stands for enjoy, just showing happiness and warmth when you play with your child. And so these are just all skills that give your child positive attention. There are ways to teach your child without frustration for either of you. And again, these skills increase self-esteem and promote other social skills like sharing and attending to others. So I'm gonna hand it off to Ellen to talk about some other skills.
All right, so while the pride skills are a great way to increase behaviors that we like good social behaviors by giving attention to them, as Sandy mentioned, there are other ways that might be a little more frustrating that sometimes we might use that we really would want to reduce. Instead, we'd want to use the pride skills. So we call these the don't skills, and it's not that we would never use them, but it's that we want to be selective in how we're using these types of statements. So one of them is commands. So that's any sort of statement that tells a child what to do. And it could be, to put on their coat before they go outside, which is a really important thing. Or it could be, telling them what to play with or telling them what to say to someone else. And so we want to be really using commands selectively for those situations that are very important for a child to follow, so that we don't kind of risk a negative interaction of the child then not following the command and then you having to decide whether you should provide a consequence or what would be the best thing to do next. So we really suggest being selective and using commands only when they are for very important things that you want your child to do. Another skill to try to reduce is your use of questions. And questions are often a way that we use in terms of social behavior and language and communication. Adults often use questions as a way to try to get children to talk more and to use the words that they have. But questions can be frustrating for children to hear over and over. If you think about how it feels maybe being in an interview when someone is asking you lots of different things, kind of rapid fire, you can get a little flustered, a little bit frustrated. And so asking your child a lot of questions to get them to speak can also be a challenging strategy that may not be as effective. So instead, you can use the skill that Sandy reviewed of reflections, where you're reflecting back what your child is already saying, and that will help them use more words and expand their language. So questions, again, we want to be selective in using them when it's really important that your child answer, but not as a way to just get your child to try to communicate or speak more. And then the final skill we want to really minimize is the use of criticism. And we'll talk a little bit more about the best ways to deliver criticism when you do need to provide some critical feedback. But in general, we know when children get praise, that can make them feel really good and help their self-esteem. But when they get a lot of criticism or a lot of negative feedback about the things they aren't doing so well, and that could be socially or with their language or even their behavior, that can start to not feel so good and negatively impact children's self-esteem. So we want to be selective in our use of criticism also. So one thing that can be important is to keep in mind striking a balance where you're using much more praise and much less corrective feedback or criticism. So even though instruction and correction is sometimes helpful and necessary, it's important to try to hit a ratio of 5 praises or positive types of feedback to just 1 criticism. And that way we are making a big effort to provide attention to the things children are doing well and not giving them too much negative feedback, since that can be more frustrating. So sometimes it can be helpful to kind of keep an eye just in maybe a 5 or 10 minute period of kind of counting in your head, how many times do I think I'm giving my child some positive feedback, to sort of be a little conscious and reflective of that, and really try for making sure you're giving a 5-to-1 ratio of that praise to criticism. In the times where you do want to deliver some criticism or some constructive feedback, a helpful strategy is what we call the feedback sandwich. And this is a way to kind of sandwich the criticism or the critique in between some positive feedback. So even when a child has done something that maybe wasn't the best solution that they could have done at that time, the fact that they were, so in a social situation, if a child has, made a mistake or something that you'd want to help them do better, there are often positive things that they've also done. So we want to keep an eye, even when we're providing correction, to what those positive things might be, and to sort of start our feedback by giving a positive comment, then giving that critique, and then ending with a positive comment. And this will kind of buffer sort of the negative feelings that people may have when they receive that criticism, so that there's positive there too. So we can give a couple examples of how this might look. So for many children with autism or social communication challenges, having eye contact and really looking at people when they talk might be something that your child might struggle with. And so while we want to provide feedback around that, we also want to recognize the positive things children are doing if they are attempting to use their social skills and start conversations. So if your child were to start a conversation but without eye contact, an example of that feedback sandwich could be saying, I love that you started a conversation with Kyle about his new dog. Remember that if you look at his face when you're talking, then he'll know you're talking to him. But it's exciting to see you talking to your friends. So that way, instead of just honing in on, oh, remember to look at your friends when you're talking, if you're able to highlight the positive things your child is doing, it can make that feedback land a lot better and be more effective. So there's other sorts of examples that can be helpful here. So if your child is starting conversations, but is maybe hogging the conversation, you could highlight that they are starting those conversations and then give some feedback around letting their friends have a turn to talk. Or if your child is having a conversation but maybe standing too close to their friend when they're talking, again, highlighting that starting those conversations is great, but keeping track of where their body is and providing a suggestion for where to stand could also be helpful feedback to give. So whenever you're observing those social challenges, keep an eye out for the positive things you can highlight as well. So far, we've sort of talked about providing feedback more generally throughout the day, but there's something that we call special time, and this can be a helpful tool for practicing the sorts of skills that we just reviewed and having really concentrated focus on giving feedback on social skills and increasing your child's social skills. So special time is a way to practice those pride skills within just a short play period with your child. So a 5-minute play period where you're really letting your child take the lead and pick what to play, and you're trying to give just positive attention. So that feedback sandwich is something we would not use during special time. Instead, we would really focus on those pride skills. So giving labeled praises for all the things that you like that your child is doing. And socially, in a play interaction, you might look for things like sharing toys with you, giving you a turn with a toy, looking at you when they're talking to you, being flexible about what they're playing with, trying a new toy. Those are all things you can try to praise during this type of special time. And you can use those reflections for their social and communication behavior also. So you can be sure to be reflecting your child's language, maybe adding a little bit to what they're saying, expanding their statement to help them learn new language, and really imitating that eye and pride, imitating their play, describing their play, and being enthusiastic during this type of time. And the don't skills that I talked about are ones that we would totally avoid during special time. So we would not ask children any questions or commands, give them any commands, or provide any criticisms. And that's so that this is really like a therapeutic bonding time with your child where you can focus on all the positive things about them that they're doing well. So when you're conducting special time, a few things to keep in mind is that it can be really helpful to try to do this daily and kind of make it part of your schedule or routine. If you have a visual schedule in your home that's maybe posted on the fridge, having that be one of the activities that's part of that routine that your family does. It's really valuable if it's one-on-one time. So if you have a few children, this can be a helpful way to give each child individual attention. And that way they're all getting an opportunity to get that positive feedback from you during special time. It can be helpful to limit distractions like having a TV on or other noisy things in the environment or other people walking in and out of the room, and really have it be a protected interaction with just you and your child. It's also helpful if it's brief, just 5 minutes or so. And that way you can do it more consistently rather than, something that's 20 minutes long would be much more challenging to fit in every day. But if it's a brief period of time, you can really be focused on trying to use as many of those pride skills and giving as much positive attention to social behavior as you can during that short period of time. It can be exhausting to practice new skills, as you probably know from practicing other kinds of techniques that you've learned through services your child might participate in. But if you do have sort of just a short window, that can make it less tiring. It can also be helpful if special time is not sort of a reward for your child having a good day, but just a consistent part of your routine so that your child every day has that opportunity for positive feedback from you. We also included a few suggestions of the kinds of toys that can be helpful for special time that can lead to really rich social interactions that you have with your child. So things that lend themselves to sharing and working together, like building a marble run or building with blocks. Coloring, where you might be drawing different pictures but sharing the materials that you're using. Building with trains or cars can also be helpful. Or having pretend toys like a Mr. Potato Head, where your child might build different creative constructions with them. Some toys that are not as helpful that we typically suggest are avoided are toys that might be really hard for you to avoid those questions and commands. So messy toys, or toys that lend themselves to more rough behavior like outside sports equipment, or screens where you're not likely to be as interactive with your child if they're playing a game on a screen, or even books. Even though reading's an excellent activity to do with your child for other reasons, when you're really trying to focus on that social behavior and praising social behavior, books are not the best for eliciting that. So it's those really creative building toys that are the best ones to use for this time. So now that we've kind of presented a number of different ideas for providing feedback both throughout the day and within special time, it can be helpful to sort of think about how you might try some of these things out at home. So you might think about when in your schedule you could fit this in, where in your house might be the least distracting, most kind of secluded place that you could do that, and what sorts of toys you already have at home that might work well. You could also remind yourselves which skills, those pride skills, you could use, and what things you'd avoid during that time. And then in terms of the feedback sandwich, that's sort of something you'd use throughout the day, times when you do want to provide feedback. And we gave a few examples, but it can be helpful to think about what are the social behaviors that you really are hoping your child can learn to do better. And how could you maybe target those behaviors with the feedback sandwich? So thinking about, what is my child already doing that I can give them that positive praise for? And what is the behavior I want to help them with that I could give them that critique for? And then you can sort of be on the lookout throughout your day for those behaviors. So